Harry has been shut out of the FIFA World Cup, not uninvited in some general administrative sense of not being on the relevant list, shut out by a specific and documented reason that has a specific person's name attached to it.
Prince Harry, a man who would have been expected before his move stateside to be one of the faces of the FIFA World Cup being held in the United States of America, has been shut out. And we're hearing it's in large part because of his personal feud with footballing legend David Beckham.
David Beckham. The distinction between uninvited and shut out matters here. Uninvited suggests absence from a list, a passive outcome. Shut out suggests an active dynamic in which someone's presence is specifically not sought because of who else is present and what their presence means. That is the picture that emerges from the reporting this week about Harry and the World Cup final. The detail that makes it genuinely significant is not the snub itself. Individual events are declined all the time for all sorts of reasons, and not everyone can be invited to everything. But what the specific framing of the snub reveals about the settled shift in Harry's commercial and social status over the past 5 years, and specifically about the judgment that major global events are now making about whose presence enhances them and whose presence does not. Tonight, we are going through the World Cup story. What it says about how far the Beckham-Sussex relationship has traveled since the 2018 wedding, where David and Victoria sat in the front row as honored guests, the specific incident in Australia that reportedly ended whatever goodwill survived the accusation, and then a story that has been building quietly for 5 years. The Bench, the children's book that was supposed to launch Meghan as an author, whose 5-year anniversary this week has produced a moment of reckoning about what that commercial failure was actually telling us at the time about everything that was to follow. Let's start with the World Cup, because the reporting is specific and the detail matters.
Meghan Markle.
Yes, my favorite.
A force for good, or?
Well, I think a force for a perpetual embarrassment. Perpetual.
Are you happy to have her back in the United States?
We are not. We'd love to do a trade.
The FIFA World Cup is being held in the United States. Harry is based in the United States. On any normal assessment of where he was 5 years ago, the global profile, the American base, the celebrity network, the prior record of appearing at major international sporting events alongside royalty, athletes, and entertainment figures, he would have been a natural presence at a tournament of this scale being held on his doorstep. A few years ago, the assumption would have been that he would be at the heart of it. Front row, celebrity appearances, the kind of presence that generates its own coverage. The way he was at the heart of the London 2012 Olympics when the Sussex story was still in its early popular phase. He is not. Rob Shooter's reporting is direct about why. David Beckham. Harry has not been invited to the FIFA World Cup final.
Prince Harry has not been invited to the FIFA World Cup final. And insiders tell Naughty But Nice the reason is simple: David Beckham. The soccer icon is expected to be one of the biggest stars at the event, while Harry won't be there at all.
David Beckham is expected to be one of the biggest names at the event, and the sources describe the choice not as a logistical decision or a guest list management issue, but as a settled judgment about whose presence the tournament welcomes and what those presences mean. Football picked its prince years ago, and that prince is David Beckham. That framing, football picked its prince, is worth sitting with. Because what it describes is not just a personal rivalry or a social snub between former friends. It is a status assessment made by an event with a global platform about which presence enhances the event and which presence complicates it. Those assessments, once made at the level of a major international event, tend to be durable. They reflect accumulated public perception, who this person is, what their presence communicates, what it does to the event around them, rather than a single moment's judgment. That is why the World Cup story is significant as an indicator of trajectory rather than just as a social story about a friendship that ended badly.
The snub carries extra sting because Harry and Meghan Markle were once close friends with David and Victoria Beckham. That relationship unraveled after the Sussexes allegedly accused the Beckhams of leaking stories to the British press. David never forgave it, says a source. The accusation destroyed the trust. Once that happened, there was no coming back.
The sources quoted in the reporting describe a relationship that had already been destroyed before the World Cup assessment was made. that the current exclusion is not a judgment about current conduct, but the consequence of a breach that happened years ago and was never repaired. The accusation that David and Victoria Beckham were leaking stories to the British press, made by the Sussex operation toward people they had counted as close friends, is described as the specific moment of destruction. David never forgave it. The accusation destroyed the trust. Once that happened, there was no coming back. If Palace Insider is giving you the full picture on this kind of story, the specific detail, the 5-year retrospective, the structural reading rather than just the headline, the like button costs nothing, and it keeps this channel going and reaching people who want this kind of analysis.
David Beckham went all the way to Australia, and Harry said that he'd got no time to see him, he doesn't want to see him, he's too busy. So there was Harry sort of getting ready to be with a football match, a very important one, and he was left very rudely for David Beckham. And I think, you know, he is the king of football and all the rest of it.
The Beckham accusation is worth examining carefully because it sits inside a broader pattern in how the Sussex operation has tended to explain negative coverage. The repeated tendency to identify a specific named person or institution as the source of the briefings and stories, rather than accepting that the coverage might be emerging from multiple directions for multiple reasons simultaneously. At the time the Beckham accusation was made, Harry and Meghan were at the center of one of the most intensively covered royal stories in a generation, generating an extraordinary volume of media coverage from many simultaneous sources and many different directions. Stories were emerging from within the royal household, from people who had known them in their previous lives across multiple decades and institutions, from their own team through sources described as close to the couple, and from the general media apparatus that surrounds any major public figure who is generating controversy at that scale. The suggestion that this volume of coverage was being orchestrated or directed by one specific couple who themselves do not enjoy press intrusion and have no obvious motive for generating negative coverage of former friends does not survive even basic analysis. What the Beckhams were, before the accusation, was people who had attended the wedding, who had a social relationship with Harry and Meghan, and who moved in overlapping circles in the British celebrity and cultural world. The accusation placed them at the center of a media operation they had no reason to be running, and the response from David Beckham, as described by the sources speaking this week, was the specific kind of anger that comes from being blamed for something that you know with certainty you did not do. David went to Australia. He made the trip, a considerable journey, to attend an event, to see Harry, to sustain in person what had been a genuine friendship, despite the accusation that was already making that friendship difficult to maintain. Harry did not have time to see him. He was too busy. Harry was getting ready to be associated with a major football match, one of the most important sporting events at that moment in that region, and the man who had come all the way from wherever he was in the world to be there and have a conversation could not get a meeting. David Beckham came all that distance and had to return without speaking to Harry once. That specific incident, the Australia no-show, is what the sources identify as cementing the final breach. Not the accusation in isolation, which in theory might have been worked through if both parties had committed to addressing it directly. But the accusation followed immediately by the abandonment, which told David Beckham something very specific about how much the friendship was valued relative to whatever else was on Harry's schedule that day. The accusation said, "You betrayed me." The no-show in Australia said, "And I don't think this relationship is worth the effort to resolve it." Since then, the Beckhams have moved into William's orbit in a way that is visible, consistent, and has generated its own ongoing positive coverage. David has publicly supported William's charitable and sporting initiatives. Catherine wears Victoria Beckham's designs regularly and in high-profile settings, giving Victoria's label royal adjacency of exactly the kind that a luxury fashion brand values. The alignment is public, which means the realignment from the Sussex world to the Wales world is also public, visible to anyone who was watching both relationships develop in opposite directions over the same period. And now the World Cup has provided the most prominent single expression of where that realignment has landed. Beckham as one of the faces of the biggest sporting event in the world, Harry not present. Subscribe to Palace Insider so you never miss what we cover next, and drop your take in the comments below. Do you think the Beckham accusation was ever based on anything credible? Or was it a catastrophic misread of where the briefings were actually coming from? One that cost Harry one of his few genuinely famous remaining friendships. Now let's talk about The Bench, because this week marked the 5-year anniversary of Meghan's children's book, and the Daily Mail's retrospective of what that anniversary reveals about the broader Sussex commercial trajectory deserves a closer reading than it typically gets from channels covering this story. The Bench was published on the 8th of June 2021. The timing should have been commercially favorable in almost every way a major publisher could have asked for when launching a book by one of the most discussed public figures in the world. COVID restrictions were easing across the summer, producing a period where people had both disposable income from reduced spending elsewhere and a sustained habit of purchasing books. Meghan was at the height of the post-Oprah global attention surge. Her interview with Oprah Winfrey had aired in March 2021, generating the biggest royal controversy in a generation. And the names Meghan and Harry were appearing in more headlines than almost any other figures in British or American public life. The book was backed by Penguin Random House, one of the most powerful publishing operations in the world, with a reported $40 million deal for 4 books across both Harry and Meghan. The Bench sold 3,212 copies in its first week in the United Kingdom. It did not chart in the UK official top 50. For a book released at that specific moment of maximum name recognition, the post-Oprah surge, the global controversy, the media apparatus fully engaged, the Penguin Random House promotional machine behind it, and every celebrity journalist in the world ready to cover the first significant creative output from the Duchess of Sussex. Those numbers represent a commercial outcome that even the most sympathetic analysis cannot dress up as a success. The book should have been difficult to avoid in that period. Instead, it was possible to walk past it in a bookshop, notice it briefly, and continue past it without slowing down. And 3,212 copies in the first week is what the numbers from those decisions look like. The book described itself as exploring the special bond between father and son as seen through a mother's eyes. That framing carried an immediate and obvious problem that commentators noted at the time and that readers encountered even before they opened the cover. The author's own relationship with her father had been severed completely, publicly, and in ways that had generated sustained global media coverage of their estrangement. Thomas Markle, excluded from his daughter's wedding, communicating only through television interviews, had become one of the most visible father-daughter estrangements in celebrity culture. Writing a book about the tender beauty of the parental bond between father and child in that context was a choice that readers noticed. The book's commercial premise and its author's most publicly known family situation pulled directly against each other, and readers processed that contradiction instinctively, even if they did not articulate it in those terms. But the 5-year retrospective reveals something more significant than the first week numbers, which were bad enough. What the 5 years since The Bench have shown is the shape of the commercial arc in its full form. The $40 million Penguin Random House deal covered 4 books. The Bench is one. Harry's memoir, Spare, is one. Spare was a genuine commercial success, selling millions of copies worldwide on the specific promise of institutional revelation. Secrets from inside the palace, accusations about named family members, a royal perspective on a royal rupture that readers had been following for years. The advance for the books was substantially justified by what Spare generated. 2 books down, 2 remaining. And then nothing. No publication date, no announced manuscript, no title, no reported indication that the remaining 2 books under the deal are in active preparation. The Daily Mail's analysis notes that the deal appears to have effectively concluded its active phase without the remaining books materializing. That Penguin Random House, like Netflix and Spotify before them, has moved on without a renewal at the original scale. There were reports of a joint Harry and Meghan wellness book that did not appear. Reports of Meghan working on her own memoir. A Vanity Fair piece describing a manuscript that was apparently being prepared against the eventuality of a Sussex separation. A post-divorce book written before the divorce, held in readiness. That last detail is interesting not primarily for what it says about the state of the marriage, which is a separate question that the sources quoted do not actually settle, but for what it says about how the commercial infrastructure appears to have been planned. Maintaining a manuscript in development against a future event that has not yet occurred is a rational commercial decision if the future event is the asset whose commercial value you are relying on. It suggests the operation is planning around the story of what might happen rather than around the independent commercial appeal of who the people involved are right now. What the 5-year Bench anniversary makes visible is the specific shape of the commercial arc. The early deals, Netflix, Spotify, Penguin Random House, were signed on the strength of one story. a royal couple who had departed the most famous institution on Earth and were willing to explain why through commercial formats that global audiences would pay for. That story was genuinely new, genuinely significant, and worth the enormous sums the companies that bought it paid. The institutions making those decisions were buying into a story with real urgency and real audience appetite. But a story has a natural life cycle. The urgency is highest at the beginning. The numbers across the subsequent years confirm this precisely. The 2022 Netflix documentary about the royal crisis generated 81.6 million hours of viewing in its first week. The 2025 cooking show, which was disconnected from the institutional crisis and offered instead a portrait of domestic California life, generated approximately 5 million total views and ranked 383rd globally in the engagement report for the first half of 2025, below a 2014 episode of Peaky Blinders, below a children's cartoon. The same platform, the same deal structure, the same woman. The difference was the story. Crisis versus jam. And the crisis story has a sell-by date that is determined by how far in the past the crisis recedes, not by how much new content is produced about it. The Bench was the first visible indication of the commercial architecture's structural problem. The book failed because readers were interested in Meghan as a royal figure exiting one of the world's most famous institutions in dramatic and controversial circumstances, not as a children's author writing about the emotional texture of fatherhood in a book that did not require any royal connection to exist. When the story is the thing that generates the interest rather than the person's other projects do not inherit the story's commercial value. The interest does not transfer from the story to the person. It stays attached to the original premise. And when the original premise is no longer fresh, the projects that follow it on their own merits have to stand on their own merits. That lesson has now played out across 5 years, multiple commercial formats, and multiple business relationships. The Netflix equity exit in March 2026, the Spotify deal that ended without renewal, the Penguin Random House deal whose remaining books have not appeared, the As Ever brand whose American web traffic nearly halved in 4 months in the market where it actually sells. Each case produces the same underlying pattern, an enormous initial deal on the back of the royal story, and the specific urgency it carried at the moment of signing, declining performance as the story ages and the institutional distance grows and the audience recalibrates its interest, and a contract structure that does not renew at the original scale because the original premise cannot be reproduced and the independent commercial case has not been established. The Bench sold 3,212 copies in its first week when it was published in 2021. 5 years later, the commercial operation that was built on the same underlying premise has had its most significant partnerships restructured, ended, or reduced. The book was not a harbinger that anyone chose to take seriously at the time, because the larger deals were still coming and the broader story was still generating. Looking back from 5 years on, it was telling the complete story in miniature before the rest of it had happened. Before we close, there is one more story from this week that provides a contrast worth noting, because it says something about what genuine longevity in the public interest actually looks like, as opposed to the commercial version of that longevity. Letters and cards exchanged between Princess Diana and the late British actor Terence Stamp have gone to auction this week. The correspondence runs from 1991 and covers a range that reflects the depth and ease of the friendship. Lunch arrangements, champagne thanks, Prozac. Diana mentions it with characteristic irreverence, writing 3 cheers for Prozac, not the American variety, I hasten to add, and a series of humorous postcards sent with a lightness that the formal public Diana was never able to show on camera. One features a bare female breast with the caption, "All the breast from London." Another poses the question of why God invented sex, with the punchline delivered inside the card. The letters show Diana in the register that made people love her most, and that she was rarely able to show in public. Irreverent, warm, genuinely funny, sending risque postcards and thanking people for champagne and mentioning Prozac with the cheerfulness of someone who has decided to treat her own difficulties with a measure of lightness. Completely at ease with someone she trusted deeply enough to be herself around, rather than the version of herself that the situation required. The letters do not contain institutional secrets or political revelations that would be damaging to anyone living. They contain a person being a person. Funny, affectionate, irreverent, human, in the way that all of us are when we think we are not being observed or recorded, when we trust the recipient enough to drop the performance entirely. What makes these letters interesting in the current context is not their content, entertaining as it is. It is what Terence Stamp did with them. He kept them for 30 years. He kept them through Diana's death, through the enormous commercial appetite for anything connected to her memory, through the documentaries and the biographies and the auction houses and the estates all bidding for material. He never sold them. He never leaked them. He never gave an interview describing what Diana had confided in him or what she was really like when the cameras were off. He simply held what she had given him and kept it private until his own death. At which point, his estate made the decision to allow the correspondence to be auctioned. The decision to sell came from his estate after his death, not from him during his lifetime. That distinction matters. Diana trusted a wide range of people across her life, not all of them well. The ones she trusted well tended to be the ones who held what she gave them, who understood that proximity to someone extraordinary does not automatically entitle you to profit from it. The ones who understood that distinction, that proximity to someone extraordinary is a trust, not a commercial asset, were the ones she went back to. Terence Stamp understood it for 30 years, across Diana's death, across the global appetite for anything connected to her memory, across every opportunity that presented itself to turn the correspondence into something else. The letters survived him, held privately through everything, because the friendship was real, and he treated what was real as something worth protecting rather than as a commercial asset waiting for the right moment and the right publication deal. Those are two very different ways of understanding what someone's trust in you is worth. The contrast with what has become the operating model for the Sussex commercial operation does not need to be stated explicitly. Some things are worth holding. The people who understood which things those were tended to be the ones Diana called when she wanted to be honest, rather than when she needed to be performing. What does the Beckham story tell you about how the Sussex operation assessed and treated its own friendships when those friendships became inconvenient? And does the 5-year bench retrospective change how you read the broader commercial ambitions of the whole post-royal project? Were these failures of execution that better management could have avoided? Failures of concept in how the post-royal commercial architecture was designed, or something more fundamental about the gap between what audiences were interested in and what the operation was offering once the departure story had run its natural course? Drop your take in the comments below. Subscribe to Palace Insider so you never miss what we cover next, and the like button is how we keep doing this. Until the next one, the story keeps developing, and we will be here when it does.